In the last video, I made a parquet tabletop, and in this video, I'll be making the frame. I started by ripping some lengths of oak that came from the salvaged hat and coat stands to a thickness of 12mm on the table saw. These would be used to make the stretchers that go in between the table legs. I would cut these to their final length later on in the project. Next I needed to make the legs. I started by clamping a stop block at 37cm on the mitre station to cut 4 equal lengths. Again I used more of the oak that came from the salvaged hat and coat stands. These pieces had beveled edges, which I wasn't too keen on, so I ripped each face off on the table saw on each piece. So this is one of the legs. I want the legs to be tapered, and I want the taper to start just below where the stretchers will be, and I want the taper to end so that this piece finishes square. That measures 28mm, so I'll make a mark at 28mm. I'm going to use this tapering jig to make the cut, so I can adjust this to the correct angle and run it against the table saw fence. To set the angle on the tapering jig, I'm first going to find a place where I want it to start, and about there looks good, so I'll tighten that down. Then I'll look at where I want the cut to end, which is lined up with this mark, and adjust the jig so that it's level with that line. So the cut should start here, which looks good, and end here, which looks good. Tighten that down and I'll make the cut. I made some marks on the tops of the legs to indicate where I would be cutting the joints. This is just so that I don't get in a muddle and cut the joints in the wrong places. Next I marked up a reference line equally on each piece, which would help me to cut the joints in the same place on each leg.
Hi there, how you doing? Alright, is this for yourself or are you doing it as a, paid job or what?
It's for children, so they're at the garden playing and I'm upstairs watching Sunny painting.
Oh.
Then I traced around the edge of one of the stretchers onto a scrap piece of blockboard, and this piece would be used as a router template for cutting all the rebate joints on the legs. I cut that out on the bandsaw. Then I could line up the template with the reference lines I'd drawn on the legs and clamp the template firmly in place onto the leg.
You accept that you can't go on forever, and I think I was very lucky to do 4 games and to experience.
I used a 12mm template bit in the router with the bearing running around the template to guide the cut. Next I needed to square up the joint with a chisel so that the stretchers would fit. Then I could glue up the legs to the short stretchers.
I don't know, but I know.
Wow, when you hold the fate of Friday night in your hand along with you for the first time, wow.
I used a clamp to apply pressure and checked for squareness with a small square.
Wanted to celebrate the 25th birthday of the World Wide Web.
Then I fired in some brad nails. These nails were on the inside of the frame so they wouldn't be visible. Now I just need to add the long stretchers. Again, I made reference lines on the legs to indicate where I wanted the long stretchers to join the legs.
The truth will always haunt me, even though it set me free.
To find the correct length for the long stretches, I'm going to position these legs, make a mark on the inside of the joint, and then measure the distance between the two marks. I cut the stretchers to size on the miter saw. Before assembling the frame, I decided to do some sanding as it seemed easier to do it at this stage. Then I could assemble the rest of the frame. Again, I applied glue and used a clamp to hold everything together, checked that everything was square, and then fired in some brad nails. These nails would be on the outside of the frame, but they're pretty small, and later I'll add some wax to the frame which will fill the nail holes, so they won't look too bad.
I'm focused now, so here we are. There goes the alarm.
With the frame assembled, I did some hand sanding and eased over the sharp edges. I also rounded over the bottom of the legs a bit, which should prevent the wood splintering when the table is moved around. I applied Danish oil to bring out the grain and protect the wood. And when the oil had dried, I applied a coat of rustic pine brie wax to match the tabletop. Next, I just needed a way to attach the frame to the top. I decided to use cleats, so I ripped some of the leftover parquet bits that I'd used to make the tabletop in half. I drilled some pilot holes in them with a countersink bit. Then I could attach them to the frame. I didn't bother using glue here, screws will be fine on their own. With the tabletop upside down, I could then screw through the cleats into the top.